Hello guys, my name is Rick and that's my Elago Mars, and today we have a very special video. Someone reached out to the channel for the first time ever and asked us to do an STL review, to which I absolutely said yes. Now, one thing I have to be completely honest with is the first half of these STL files we did on the Elago Mars. The second half we did with a different printer. The reason being is because I was being ignorant, trying out a new resin, and my Elago Mars started giving out on me with certain technicalities that I just won't get into right now. But these small technicalities in the end made for really bad 3D prints. Half of them I had to throw away because they were warped and or the details were super muddy. And I thought, you know what, this wouldn't be fair to the person that we are doing this review on. So I went out of my way to buy a new 3D printer. Yeah, you can't even see me. That's how big this box is. Let's get it out of the package, shall we? The new hero and workhorse of this channel is going to be the Photon Mono X2, and it's a wonderful 3D printer, but we're not here to do a review of 3D printers. We're here to talk about that sweet STL bundle that we got to do a review of. Morkak Foundry reached out to us and asked us to do a review on their Ork STL models, to which I got to choose which files, and they did give them to me for free. But they still asked me to do an honest review as if I was purchasing these models. The bundle of models I chose to pick were the walkers and Scrappa tanks. Now, if you couldn't tell, the walkers were made with the Photon Mono X2. These prints came out absolutely wonderful and snapped right off the supports. It was a very pleasing experience. The only thing I noticed that was a reoccurring factor with the Elago Mars and the Photon Mono X2 is that the details were a little bit muddy, and that's just due to the placement of how the models were on the printer bed. Sometimes when you have it facing the printer bed and or where the UV kind of shines up onto the printer plate, it'll sometimes muddy the details. This is an easy fix just by taking the STL files yourself, flipping them to the desired area, and applying the supports. But in the end, I believe Morkak faced these models toward the printer bed in such a way so that when these models were built, you wouldn't see the muddy details regardless. Things like the arms and or legs had the inner thigh pieces facing the printer bed, so therefore when assembled, if it came out muddy and or slightly off, you just wouldn't see them. I do minimal adjustments to my 3D printers when it comes to stuff like reviews and or building other 3D prints in order to point out any flaws that might be there, because I want to come at this whole 3D printing hobby and or experience from the idea that you just bought your printer today, hit the print button and had it go. And in all honesty, that's kind of what I did here. I only ran the codes of calibration, and even with these slightly muddy details, the prints still came out really great. Assembling the scrappers was really easy to do. Most of the time it was pretty intuitive, and if I ever had any questioning about any details, I simply just went on the Instagram page, and or you can go to the Colts 3D page that they have and reference the photos. The photos that they have on the website and on the Instagram are super clear, and you can kind of tell where things are supposed to land. When it comes to assembling the walkers, it comes with a variety of weapon options such as several different claws, shootas, missile pods, flamers, and chainsaws. The bodies of the walkers and legs also come with a variety of different sets that give details to kind of that orcish feel that I absolutely love and enjoy. Now, while building these walkers, I actually ran out of pieces and decided to use some of the Elago Mars pieces that I could salvage, and those are going to be in the blue resin. Little to my knowledge did I realize that some of these had cracks and even muddier details until I put on a primer, to which I decided to go forward and paint them anyways. When it comes to some of the muddier details on the walkers, I would ask for you to ignore them because they do not bring a good representation of what these models actually are. And in the end, I hope you guys can trust me when I say these models do not come out that rough. At the end of the video, you'll notice with a decent paint job, no matter how muddy the details are, you can actually utilize that and make it look like scrappy kind of orcish stuff that will work regardless. Next up is the Scrappa tanks. The Scrappa tanks are probably one of my favorite, and as you can tell, they're in that clear blue resin, so they were made with Elago Mars, but to my surprise, they came out just fine. For some reason, the Elago Mars had no problem printing these. One of my favorite things about these tanks is that the barrels are magnetizable. So if you have a couple options you want to switch in and out, you can totally do so by just sticking some of those magnets in the barrels. As we've come to expect, these are muddy on the bottom of the model, but that's totally okay because, hey, they're pre-supported and they're already hollowed out and they have holes in them. So that means you don't even have to worry about doing that yourself. The resin will just drain. You're not printing a solid block for each tank. You're saving a lot of resin and a lot of time, and it's wonderful. The pre-supports came out just fine on the holes of the tank. And now next is the treads. My only gripe with the treads is that the tracks are very thin, and this can cause snapping because, well, if you're like me, I tried to just pull them off the supports, but I knew better, and I should have known better doing that. But they're the only thing that are holding the cogs all together, and I can kind of see the design choice. It kind of makes the tanks look a little more scrappy and kind of thrown together rather than well built, which is what you want when it comes to orks or grots. So my little trick to this was to not cure the tracks all the way, so that way they have a little more bounce if they ever hit the ground and or a table. But in the end, I think it would have been better to maybe have designed these a little thicker, so that way they're a little more safe on the tabletop. But I understand the design choice completely, and they have totally grown on me. Another little bonus detail that I appreciated and did notice is that the cogs on these tracks are also hollowed out and have holes in them, so that way the resin drains and you save even more money on that. So I definitely appreciated that little bit of detail. One other thing is I'm a bit of a child when it comes to my little tanks. I love the turrets being able to be posable and whatnot. And the one thing I noticed is that they have to be stagnant, so you have to glue them into place. And it would have been nice if there was a spot for a magnet. That's, again, just my little tidbit there, but it's definitely not necessary. And if I really wanted one, I would have just drilled a hole into the turret and the hull of the tank. So now that they're primed, it's painting time. I'm actually making these models for a buddy of mine who plays orks because I don't play orks at all, and I think he's going to really like them. I asked him what kind of themes he likes, and he doesn't really have one, so I painted these in good old Goth style. The Goth orks are just black armor with checker panels, so that'll make these tanks really, really easy to do. All I did for the checkers was outline a grid in pencil, and then followed through with some Stonewall gray, and then layered on top of that with a white. These checkers probably took the longest time to do, and they look awesome, but I felt really dumb with the weathering steps, and you'll kind of see what I mean. Next up, we're using a gunmetal silver on the treads and cogs. It's really simple right now, but later we're going to give these a lot more character with some rust and some weathering. For the engine block, we used a variety of silvers, coppers, and bronzes, just whatever kind of felt right. Now it's time to do some edge highlighting with that same gunmetal. We're going to be going around just the edges of the tank, making things look worn out, as well as hitting any battle damage and or any 3D printing mishaps. It's something I do with some of my 3D prints, so that way I don't have to worry about those mistakes and just use them as character. It saves time, it saves money, and it makes things pretty unique. So you know those perfectly sharp squares I just made? Well, we're gonna ruin them with some, well, chipping techniques, using a sponge and just going over the whites just to make it so it looks worn out. It is a worthy sacrifice for some great storytelling, but it is also something that pained me to do. For some further storytelling and character, we're going to be using some rust pigments. I like rust pigments a lot because it's not like wet, oily rust, like dirty down rust. That stuff is really great, but I always felt like it was almost a little greasy looking, whereas weathered pigments, they're just dusty, and it's kind of nice. It gives it a deserty, kind of abandoned feel. So in this next segment of weathering, I actually got kind of restless and didn't feel like that pigmentation was enough, and so I did some experimenting. What I did is I laid down a dirty down rust, which is a lot oilier, like I mentioned, but then I laid on a pigment powder, and even that felt a little off, so I then went over with a oil wash to kind of combine it all together, and it actually really worked very well. I don't know why, but the black oiliness and the red pigments that kind of fused together all over the tank treads just kind of screamed worn down to a degree that I haven't really seen before in some of my projects. Alright, next up is the walkers, and I primed these guys black because I didn't have a white primer for my airbrush, so what I did end up using was a white ink with several coats. It was a little annoying, but it worked. Now the reason for that white coat is because underneath we're doing a pink zenithal, because we're going to be using yellow armor with these walkers. I felt like yellow would have worked the best to make these guys really stand out, and I recently learned that buddy that I was painting these for made his Dreadclaw in a yellow orangish pigment, so it worked perfect. Now the reason for pink zenithal, if you don't know, is because when you combine the pink with the yellow, it makes dark orange shadows, so it makes things really look dynamic and gives it a lot of depth, and it's just a really fun trick to do. So for the next little segment of this, I'm painting all the places I want kind of that gunmetal silver black, because I like to dry brush over that, and I feel like it gives it a little bit more depth. I don't know if this is the right way to paint metallics, but it's something I've been doing since I started the hobby, and I don't know, it just kind of looks cool to me. The next metallic I chose to kind of complement the yellow orangish hue was a copper. This way it wouldn't kind of clash with anything else, and it wouldn't be too bright that it was competing with the yellow. It would kind of just settle in between with earthy tones. Next up is my new favorite acrylic by Green Stuff World, Choco Brown, that we're going to be using to stipple on some chipping. I feel like using a gunmetal would have been inappropriate because it would have clashed with that bright yellow, whereas the Choco Brown is going to kind of bring in those earthy tones and keep things balanced, but still stand out just enough that you can tell the paint is chipping away. The Choco Brown is obviously supposed to represent rusting underneath the coat of yellow, and I've seen it in a myriad of paint schemes. Now to tie it all together, we're using a burnt umber oil wash, and we're just going to coat these guys in that and let them sit for about 20 minutes or so, and then pull it all off using white spirits and a Q-tip. By applying this burnt umber wash, not only will it bring down those really bright yellow tones that we have throughout the model, but it'll also matte things down a bit too. So we have a lot of browns and yellows and oranges, but we need to break it all up with a little bit of a glow effect. Now, I'm not great at glow effects, so I made it really simple and just something I could slap on pretty quick. And I used a white ink with a Tesseract glow followed by a bright green ink. And with that simple little glow effect, these guys are ready for the tabletop. Let's get into those glam shots, shall we? Guys, these models were super fun to paint up and to bring to life, and I am super thankful for Morkak Foundries to be reaching out to us and to ask us to do this review. I was totally blown away when I was asked, and I couldn't be more thankful. If you guys enjoy these models, be sure to check down in the description where I will be putting links to these models and to Morkak Foundry's Patreon, so be sure to show them some support. If you guys enjoyed this painting tutorial, this build, and this review, be sure to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. As always, thank you for supporting me at Boxnot, and we will see you in the next video.